So, welcome to Algonauts Project 2025 Challenge. My name is Ali Gayford, and before starting, I'd like to thank everyone who participated in the challenge, our sponsors, and CCN for hosting us once again. The session will be divided into three parts. I will first give you an introduction to the challenge. Then this will be followed by the talks from the top three challenge winners. And the session will conclude with a panel discussion moderated by me, where Martin Schrempf, Fabian Zenz, Martin Hebat, Lumbelek, and Radek Ciche will discuss about the future of challenges in neuroscience and also about the role that large-scale neural data sets play in this future. So let's start with what the Algonauts project is. There is a growing symbiosis between biological and artificial intelligence researchers and sciences, whereby neural principles inspire new intelligent machines, which are in turn used to understand the functioning of the brain. And so along these lines, the Algonauts project is a platform that aims at bringing further exchange of ideas and collaboration between these two fields of research, so to accelerate scientific advance in both fields. And this year, we decided to focus this multidisciplinary interaction in the problem of multimodal processing, since it is an unresolved field of question in both biological and artificial intelligence research alike. And specifically, our goal was to promote the development of computational models of how multimodal movies, including visual, auditory, and linguistic input, are processed in the human brain. And we believe that an effective way to achieve this was through a challenge. And this is because challenges have been a popular and productive framework in both neuroscience and AI, as they provide quantitative and objective scores of model development, while at the same time allowing both cooperation and competition between scientists of different fields. And therefore, in this year's edition of the Algonauts Project Challenge, we asked you to build encoding models of multimodal processing, where encoding models are predictive algorithms that take stimuli as input, such as a multimodal movie, and predict the corresponding neural responses. And specifically, we asked that your encoding models would satisfy three criteria. First, they had to accurately predict brain responses to multimodal stimulation. Second, they had to be robust and well generalize their predictions beyond their training distribution. And third, in the spirit of open science, we requested that the code and the reports of the models would be made openly available. And so in order to promote the development of encoding models that satisfied these three criteria, we based the challenge on data from Neuromod. With over 200 hours of recordings per subject to a variety of naturalistic and control tasks, Neuromod is the data set that most extensively samples fMRI responses in single human subjects. And for the purpose of the challenge, we used a subset of Neuromod, consisting of 80 hours of multimodal movies, including visual frames, audio samples, and language transcripts, and the corresponding neural activations, whole brain fMRI responses of 4 subjects, divided into 1,000 functionally defined parcels. The challenge itself consisted of 2 phases, plus a post-challenge phase. The challenge training data was shared across these phases and consisting of over 60 hours of movie stimuli and corresponding fMRI responses for season 1 to 6 of The Sick of a Friend, and also for movie 10, which is a collection of 4 movies. During the challenge model building phase, which lasted 6 months, participants trained their encoding models using the training data and then tested them in distribution on season 7 of Friends. And then during the model selection phase, which lasted 1 week, we selected the winning models only based on the accuracy of their predicted fMRI responses for 2 hours of out-of-distribution movie stimuli, where the purpose of this was to promote the development of robust models that well generalize outside of distribution. Importantly, to reduce the risk of overfitting to this out-of-distribution test split, the out-of-distribution movies remain hidden until the beginning of the second model selection phase, and we withheld the corresponding fMRI responses throughout the entire challenge. And finally, now that the challenge is over, we open an indefinite post-challenge benchmark, which I will talk about more in detail later. During each of these phases, participants submitted their models' predicted fMRI responses for the test movie stimuli to CodaBench. And to quantify the accuracy of the encoding models after each submission, the scoring program compared this prediction with the withheld fMRI responses using a Pearson's correlation. And to compute the challenge evaluation metric, these correlation scores were averaged across brain parcels and subjects, so to result in a single correlation scores which quantified the performance of each submission and which was also used to update the challenge leaderboards. Along with the challenge data, we also provided an interactive development kit tutorial on Google Colab, which illustrated how to load, visualize, and interpret the challenge data, use these data to train and test encoding models of fMRI responses to multimodal stimuli, and also prepare the model predictions in the right format for submission to CodaBench. The interactive tutorial will remain available for the post-challenge phase, and beyond serving as an aid to the Algonauts project challenge, it can also be used for educational or learning purposes. For example, as an introduction to fMRI and to deep learning-based encoding models of multimodal processing in the brain. And now let's move on to the challenge results. During the model building phase, which tested the n-distribution generalization of models on France Season 7, we received 600 submissions from 66 teams. And here you can see the histogram of the best submission of each of these teams, with the corresponding prediction accuracy, so the Pearson correlation quantifying the performance on the x-axis. The vertical dashed line indicates the score of our baseline encoding model, which was outperformed by half of the participating teams. However, our goal was not only to promote encoding models that well predict brain responses to multimodal stimulation, but also for these models to accurately generalize outside of distribution. And therefore, during the model selection phase, we evaluated the out-of-distribution generalization performance of these models. And for this, we used movie stimuli that were different from the movies of the training split in several ways, such as visually, acoustically, and also linguistically. During this phase, we received 170 submissions from 26 teams, meaning that only a portion of the teams who participated in the model building phase also participated in the model selection phase. And here you can see the histogram of prediction accuracy for the best submission of each teams, and you can see that in this phase, 2/3 of the participating teams outperformed our baseline model. Now, for these 26 teams for which we have submissions in both challenge phases, we then ask whether their ranking was preserved between the two phases. And so for this, we correlated the ranks of the teams between the two phases, and we obtained a correlation score almost at ceiling, indicating that models that better generalize in distribution also tend to better generalize outside of distribution. And we then selected the 3 teams with the highest prediction accuracy as the challenge winners. So let's start with the in-distribution generalization performance of these top 3 challenge winners. Third place is Team SDA from the Max Planck Institute. Second place is Team Stéphane Dascoli from Meta AI. First place is Team NCG, also from the Max Planck Institute. As you can see, these 3 models perform very similarly to each other, with high prediction accuracies across the entire brain, but peaks over visual, auditory, and linguistic cortex. And as expected, when tested outside of distribution, these models achieved lower prediction accuracies. But despite this, they could still generalize their predictions for stimuli coming from rather different distribution than the ones they were trained on, therefore strengthening their validity as models of the brain. And because one of our goals was to promote more robust models that better generalize out of distribution, we therefore ranked the top 3 challenge winners only based on the accuracy of their predicted fMRI responses to this out-of-distribution test. Beyond being invited to present their encoding models during this session, the challenge winners also received monetary prizes. The third place team received a prize of 3,000 euros, sponsored by Neuromod. The second place team received a prize of 5,000 euros, sponsored by Unique and the Université de Montréal. And the first place team received a prize of 7,500 euros, sponsored by the Freie Universität Berlin. And in addition to this, for all three teams, Hessen AI also sponsored a reimbursement of up to 1,600 euros for travel reimbursements to join CCN and present their winning models during this session. With over 700 submissions from 66 teams, consisting of both neuroscientists and computer scientists, the challenge led to further interaction between biological and artificial intelligence researchers, resulting in several achievements for the field of cognitive computational neuroscience. First, the challenge increased interest in multimodal modeling, which is a new modeling approach still in development, and which is important because most of our experiences are multimodal in nature. Second, many of the challenge teams built encoding models with improved prediction accuracy compared to our baseline encoding model, therefore providing a new state-of-the-art in the modeling of multimodal processing in the brain. And third, the challenge also raised awareness about an important aspect of brain models, namely their robustness to out-of-distribution generalization tests. And beyond this, the challenge also contributed to open science. Open science is one of the core principles of the Algonauts project and its challenges. And to promote this principle and allow the entire community to benefit from the challenge outcome, we made it mandatory for the teams that wanted to be considered for the winner selection process to share the reports and code of their models, which you can now find on the challenge website. And beyond this, to facilitate you in actually using these models, we additionally plan to add one of the challenge-winning models to the Brain Encoding Response Generator, or BERG, which is a resource consisting of multiple pre-trained encoding models and Python toolbox, so that you can easily generate large amounts of different types of in silico neural responses, such as fMRI or EEG, to different types of stimuli, say images or multimodal movies, and then use these model-generated neural responses for large-scale and fast-paced in silico experimentation. If you're interested in this, you can check out the GitHub page from the QR code on the slide, or you can visit our poster this afternoon. Now that the challenge is over, we open 2 indefinite post-challenge benchmarks, which are also hosted on CodaBench. One for in-distribution testing on Friends Season 7, as in the challenge model building phase, and the other for out-of-distribution testing on the out-of-distribution movies, as in the challenge model selection phase. The corresponding fMRI responses, test fMRI responses, will remain withheld, so that these benchmarks will allow to continue improving models of multimodal processing in the brain, resulting in more accurate models, but also more robust models that have a narrower gap between in-distribution and out-of-distribution generalization. We hope that the 2025 edition of the challenge will continue to inspire new challenges and interaction between biological and artificial intelligence science, and strongly welcome researchers interested in initiating similar initiatives or in collaborating with us. So if you have data or ideas for the next Algonauts challenge, do not hesitate to get in touch with us, either here at the conference or via email. As an example, the reason why we based this year's challenge on Neuromod is that 2 years ago, right after the CCN session for the Algonauts Project 2023 challenge, Julie from Neuromod reached out to us asking if we wanted to base the next challenge on Neuromod, which ended up happening. So this is to say that we are receptive to your input, and we do look forward to collaborating with you. And finally, we would like to remind you that the Algonauts project is more than just a challenge. Specifically, it is a platform that promotes multiple initiatives at the intersection of biological and artificial intelligence research. And so to reflect this, we redesigned the Algonauts project website, which now promotes initiatives beyond the Algonauts challenges, such as BERG, which I introduced a few minutes ago, Net2Brain, a toolbox to compare brain responses to the activations of deep neural networks, several large-scale neural data sets, and more to come. If you're interested in these initiatives, then check out the website. And if you have related ideas that you would like to discuss with us, then get in touch. To conclude, I would like to once again thank the teams that participated in the challenge organizers for making this possible, our sponsors, and CCN for hosting us for the third time. And now we move to the second part of the session where Dominic will moderate the talks from the top 3 challenge winners.
All right, can you hear me? Perfect. So, hello everyone. My name is Dominic Bersch, and I am a PhD student at the CVA iLab with Professor Dr. Gemma Roig. And I'm also one of the organizers of this year's challenge. And now we have come to the part where we will introduce each of the winners of this year, starting with the third place, going over to the second place, and then finishing with the first place. Each of our speakers will give a 12-minute talk, followed by a 3-minute Q&A section, so 50 minutes in total per team. And that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Denis Kujuk-Antela, representing the third-place team SDA from the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences. This team consists of Semi Ehren, who is a master student at the lab, and our speaker, Denis, who is a PhD student in the Neurodata Science and Statistical Computing Group, supervised by Nico Scherf. She has a background in computer science and neuroscience, and together with their master students, they achieved a score of 0.2094 on the out-of-distribution challenge. So please welcome Denis to present us her results. I will give you a sign when it's like 12 minutes, so you know when to finish, okay?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you. I think it's not. Yeah. I'm Denis, and I'll be presenting our approach that we developed for this challenge with my teammate Semi. Which is the multimodal recurrent ensembles for predicting brain responses to naturalistic movies. So the motivation we had to attend this challenge was because of our research interests and also our lab's research interests. So mainly it could be maybe summarized in 2 points. The first one is the latent geometry. So we're basically interested in how representations evolve in the brain with the outside stimuli, and also we're interested in opening black box models such as the deep neural networks or the brain itself. And this challenge provided us a nice way to see our different ideas in a real world scenario. So it was quite valuable for us. Before I introduce our method, I want to first give an idea of what we achieved in this challenge. So we basically used a multimodal RNN, and we had separate subject hats for prediction in our model, and we used the 100 model ensemble, which ranked as the third in the leaderboard in the out-of-distribution set phase, and also among all the competitors, we achieved the highest single parcel peak score, which was 0.63. And we also observed that we had a better correlation balance across single subject performances, meaning that we actually had the best model that worked best in the most challenging subject that I will show later in our results. So as I said, our method is quite straightforward. It's with RNNs, and I will first begin with our features, what we used there. So we extracted features from pre-trained models. For the visual features, we used video MAE, slow fast clip, and SWIN models. And for audio, we used Hubert WaveLM CLAP models. And for both visual and audio features, we extracted them per TR, which was 1.49 seconds. But for the language features, we used an expanding window, meaning that instead of taking the language data per TR, we used an expanding window. If there was any previous data available, we also used that data to extract the features for that exact TR. And let's now move to our model. We used separate LSTMs for every modality. We had a sequence-to-sequence bidirectional RNN model overall, and as you can see, we have a different LSTM for every modality. And we, at the end, needed a way to basically combine all those features, and here we used a simple average pooling. We tried other methods here, like adding an attention layer and so on, but they did not work, or like they achieved a similar performance, so we did not use them in the end. It's a basic element-wise average pooling that we used in the end. And after this average pooling, after we fused all of our features, we used another RNN, which was LSTM or a GRU. We included them both in our final ensemble model. And this RNN was used to capture cross-modality temporal structures. And after this RNN, until this point, the model is common for all the subjects. But after this point, we used separate simple MLPs for predicting every subject individually. So we don't really mix the subject data in this final portion of this model. For the losses in our model, we combined the MSE and negative correlation losses. In our ensemble, we had two options for losses. First was the MSE, and the second was the combination of MSE with the negative correlation loss. The reason was we observed that the correlation loss itself was actually not enough, was not that informative for the model, because it basically shows the direction of the predictions rather than the exact value if it's matching or not. So yeah, we used two different losses. We had to combine the negative correlation with the MSE to actually get a nice loss that we could train our model. And another idea that we tried and included in our final ensemble model was this early versus late curriculum. So this idea is originated from knowing that primary sensory areas capture the stimulus first, and then as the information progresses in the brain, it goes to the higher order regions, and we try to adapt this idea in our model by basically designating some parcels as early processing parcels, and in this case we use the visual and somatomotor networks, and we gave them greater importance at the beginning of training, because we believed that it was easier to predict at the beginning when we started training, and then gradually we reduced this emphasis as the learning progressed. And for seeing our ideas reflection in the out-of-distribution set, we adapted this validation strategy, which is a leave one movie out strategy. So basically, we trained our model in all of the data difference, all of the seasons, and then the three of the models, and we computed the validation score for each of those left out movies, and then we took the average off, and we observed that this actually gave us a really nice way of understanding how the impact would be in the out-of-distribution set. So to justify our selections in the model architecture, we performed some ablation tests. So as I mentioned, our model uses a multimodal LSTM and a separated hat for every subject. And we tried removing those. We used a unified modality LSTM where we took all the features and then used a single hat to predict all the subjects. And as you can see here on the first row, it actually performed much less compared to our methods. And we also tried the combinations. We used a multimodal LSTM but a single hat, or a unified modality LSTM and a separated hat for the subject. And those actually also performed much less. So at the end, we justified the selections of this and went with this model. For the results, as I mentioned before, we used an ensemble model where we had the same model architecture, but we varied the loss function and also the second RNN that we had. We observed that the LSTM or GRU did not make much difference, but they actually informed the ensemble in the end well. And we also had the early-late curriculum model that I explained earlier. So on the right-hand side, you can see that for different brain regions, our ensemble model outperforms all of the single models, except in the visual cortex. In the visual cortex, our early-late curriculum actually works slightly better. And on the right bottom, you see the single model performances per subject and the averages, and you can also see that our ensemble outperformed all of those single models. So about our results on the out-of-distribution set, as I mentioned in the beginning, we achieved the highest peak parcel in the auditory cortex in every subject among all the competitors, and we also achieved the highest score in the most challenging subject. If you check the right-hand side, the subject 5 always had the lowest correlation, and this was the case for all the teams actually, but ours was a bit higher, so overall we had a better balance across subject performances. However, another thing that we observed by looking at our results was the lack of performance in the prefrontal cortex. And we tried improving that. We thought that it might be due to the language features, since that area progresses higher order properties, but actually we could not in the end. And we're not sure if it's still due to the language features or the model itself. And now I want to talk about what did not work for us. This section could be much longer because there are so many things that did not work, and I know it's the same case for all the teams. Interestingly, the first 2 teams used transformers, but transformers did not really work for us. They achieved a similar performance, but we couldn't observe any improvement, so we did not use them. And we used various feature or target scaling to make the features and the targets in a similar scale, but actually this also did not work. Various subject fine-tuning methods or using different models for every network in the parcellation also did not result well. And finally, about the training adjustments, we tried out having a learning rate scheduler, and this actually did not make the model worse, but not having that made the ensemble in the end much better, so we did not use that. About the feature engineering, we tried giving the subject IDs as the feature to the model, but this also did not work for us. And also we tried various feature extraction techniques, such as like using longer clips or getting the features from earlier layers, or language sentiment prediction as a feature, and those, none of those worked. So I will just mention the open questions. Most of the things we thought that were neuroscience inspired did not work, and this was quite interesting for us. And also we used a bidirectional model which worked better than a causal model, but this is counterintuitive since the brain is it's seen as a causal model, but actually the bidirectionality provides some information to the model such that it predicts it better in the end. And also, of course, we would like to explore adding biological constraints. I would like to finally thank our lab, especially our supervisor, Nico, our lab members, Ariel, Kajal, and Katya. And thank you very much. If you want to read more on our method, you can scan the report or code.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation. Do we have any questions in the audience? Yes? Do you? Oh, wait.
You mentioned the bidirectional model helped, and that's a little counterintuitive. How much did it help?
That's a good question. I have to think, but it helped very much. Like our rank changed from, I don't remember exactly, but I mean, we wouldn't be able to rank as the third if we didn't use a bidirectional model. And we have an idea why it worked, but maybe we can discuss it afterwards.
So you mentioned subject fine-tuning. Could you explain a little bit more what that was?
Sure. This subject fine-tuning. So in our model, as I mentioned, we had separate subject hats and a common backbone, and we trained all the model for at once, basically. All the samples that was, I don't know, that belonged to subject one, went to the subject one hat, and so on. And we trained this model once, but we actually explored subject fine-tuning in a way such that after this common training, we only provided the specific subject data to the model such that it would specify the model a bit more for that specific subject, but this did not help really.
Thank you very much. Very nice talk. How many trainable parameters did you have in the model?
We checked that yesterday, and it was, I think, 75 million, but my teammate can maybe confirm that, right? 100 million. 100 million. Yeah. No, 100 million.
100 million.
I was wondering about what you said, that area-based training didn't help.
Mm-hmm.
So I was also wondering if you tried mapping only the visual part of the model to the visual cortex, or the auditory part to the auditory, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And also if you tried to see in your combined model, could you find out with some explainability ways, or like to look into which parts of the model mapped into which areas of the brain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are both really good questions. The first one we tried to explore. So I will just open the architecture. So similar to where we had different subject hats, we also tried out the idea of having different network hats. But this actually did not work. So the idea was similar to having subject hats, that the different areas would interact with each other, but at the end they would be predicted separately. But it did not work. And for about the explainability, we did not do any further analysis, but actually the result here in the visual cortex, as I mentioned, the early-late curriculum model, where it weights the visual and somatomotor areas more in the beginning, has a better performance in the visual cortex. So this actually was something that we tried towards the end. We did not explore it further, but maybe this gives us an idea of some type of, explainability when we look at the differences of those models.
I meant more in terms of modality, like did you see if you would explain more with all the modalities in the visual cortex, or with just the visual modality, like ablation in terms of the modalities in the model?
We actually did that, and interestingly, I mean, the some parcels are only specific to visual, but we only saw that in the visual cortex, not in the other areas. We tried only training with the visual, or the rest of the modalities, and somehow modality combination provides us additional information such that all of the parcels were actually improved, except some parcels in the visual cortex.
Okay, I think that's time for this team, sadly, because we have to continue with the next team. Is it okay? Otherwise, you can go on meter later on during the poster sessions, because we have to continue with the next team, sadly, because we have time.
Yeah.
So I would say give one more round of applause for Team SDA.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, cool. So for our next speaker, we have Andrzej Bijanski and his team NCG, the Neurocomputation group from Max Planck Institute for Cognitive and Brain Sciences. Their team consists of Shrey Dixit, Janis S. Keck, Andrzej Bijanski, Viktor Studiniak, and Daniel Karlstrom-Schad. And they study spatial cognition, memory and learning in brains and machines, focusing on a computational and mechanistical perspective. And together they reached a second place in this year's challenge with a score of 0.296. So please welcome Andre and his team to present us their results.
So if you're wondering, this is how you get everyone to put this on their CV. So, thanks for inviting us. It's a pleasure. I did definitely not have this on my bingo card at the beginning of the year. So I will briefly do the intro for VIBE, the Video Input Brain Encoder for fMRI response modeling, but I'll be also introducing our group briefly, and then sort of we'll hand over to each other. Who's the Neurocomputation group? So we're at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, and so we're focused on sort of interpretable models of computation in neural circuits. So the main focus is the extended hippocampal system. You see the pictures on the right, those who know. So memory, navigation, imagination, that kind of stuff. And we're particularly interested in what the brain's neural representations are at the level of neurons, single neurons, populations. How are they learned? How do they relate to behavior? And sort of can we build biologically plausible models? So with plausible learning rules, few parameters, and so forth. And then we entered the Algonauts challenge, and this happened. So just to give you a flavor, but joking aside, these sort of type of models are not classically in sort of the remit of the group, but we thought it was a really cool initiative, and also in the spirit of friendly competition, so it was a very lively time in the lab, and we were intrigued by the multimodality of the data set, and we were wondering if we can sort of apply hypotheses about brain function to sort of maybe tailor our features also, and so forth. And with that, I'll hand over to Alexander.
Yes. As other groups, we also fed some extra context to our model, but finally we instructed features only from inside this TR interval, like on the diagram. Features were very important for the success of our model. We extracted standard deviation and mean from the TR. This context window length varied from 6 to 30 seconds. For us, earlier layer and middle layer representations also were very important, so we used not only the final outputs. Also, we used the pooling of features to keep our model reasonable size. Regarding visual features, we used the smallest one, VJEPA, and slow fast. We used multimodal WAN, which consumed both audio and video features. For sound, we used open source OpenEye Whisper 3 and Beats. And finally, for text, we also used Gwen, but we fed the whole context of the whole series inside. It was very important. And for French language, finally, we used language agnostic BERT model.
Cool, thank you. So, our model predicts whole brain responses over movies, right? So, what does the model architecture really look like? It's a transformer on top of another transformer. It's a very simple model, actually. So you have these features, you extract all of these features, you pass it into a modality fusion transformer over here, and it just calculates the self-attention between the features, so there is no temporal attention. It's just one layer. We also pass in a subject embedding, right? So we use a single model for all subjects, and they only differ by this subject embedding, which is just 512 dimensions, right? And we take all of these transform features, we concatenate them, and then pass it into another prediction transformer, which gives you predictions, your predicted fMRI responses. And this has temporal attention. And it's also only 2 layers, so 3 layers of transformers. That's all. Actually, so it's a very simple architecture, and you can change things right here. So we can remove the modality fusion transformer and still perform somewhat similarly. But what are the things that actually make a difference? So no causal mask makes a difference. So similarly to the last group, if we take the future stimulus to predict the current brain responses, it works a little better. It works 0.2% better. And another thing that actually makes a huge difference is the rotational positional embedding. So for those of you who know transformers, they don't have a sense of time. You have to pass in the temporal information in the input. And what is traditionally done is you pass in positional embeddings, which are either learned or fixed sinusoidal embeddings that you add to the token embeddings. That did not work for us at all. LSTM works better if you follow that approach. What works best for us is rotational position embedding. And to simplify all of this, it just rotates the features based on their position. So if the features are too wide apart, they would become orthogonal, and they wouldn't really attend too much to each other. And that makes a huge difference for us. Over to you.
Thank you. As maybe the other competitors already said, we also wanted to get some neuroscience into this, but it seemed actually harder than we thought. So every neuroscience-inspired thing we did usually made performance worse. The only thing that actually made a difference is using these functional network-specific models. As you might know, you can assign each parcel to a functional network. These are predefined clusters which are based on similar correlation structure of these parcels. So basically, parcels that are similarly correlated to other parcels belong to the same cluster. And then you get something like visual networks or multimodal network. You've seen this before on the other slide also. And our idea then was, okay, maybe we can train separate models for each of these networks. Maybe being the case that visual features and audio features can't get mixed in the multimodal case, and maybe the model can disentangle it better when it's only trained to kind of predict visual errors, for example, which all somehow are correlated and serve the same function. And this indeed worked, at least for the visual network, and also partly for the default mode network. For the other networks, it didn't make a difference, so we took these separate models from these networks and combined them with one globally trained model for our final predictions.
Yes, so we used Friend Season 6 as our validation set, and then we trained the network on it until the early stopping was triggered, and then the network was retrained on the full training set for the amount of epochs that were used previously using the validation set. You can see the optimizer, the learning rate, and the batch size on the left below. And more importantly, we used an ensemble of 60 different models. 20 of them were predicting all the parcels, all 1,000 parcels. Then 20 models were predicting visual network, and 20 models the default mode network. And then we used the mean of the predictions of individual models. Yes, actually, all the things that we mentioned or reported before were just the tip of the iceberg. We tried many different things. None of them worked. Here we are listing only a selected honorable mentions. So these are, for example, some of the neuro-inspired ideas, like extracting features from the audio source localization model to better account for visual attention. That didn't work. Low-level features, they didn't work. ML-driven ideas like multi-head latent attention, improving the loss function, that didn't work. Then we tried also some funny heuristics, like prompting Quen to become Canadian fMRI study participant to mimic dataset a bit better. That also didn't work. And many more things. This list is not exhaustive.
All right. So I guess we can summarize this as whatever we tried first worked the best, and everything we tried to improve this further on didn't help. But our results. So after the competition concluded, we noticed we had a small bug in our data loaders. We actually didn't end up using 2 of the movies. When we include those 2 movies, these are the results, right? And these are slightly different from those on the competition leaderboard that were presented earlier. And so we have a mean accuracy of around 32.25%, for phase 1, this is season 7 of Friends. And then for the auto-distribution mean of the 6 movies, we have a Pearson correlation of around 21.25%. And we also wanted to look at how our separate visual model affected the results. And here we can see that actually, if we compute the mean difference of the voxels between us and the winning contribution, we have this very nice encoding accuracy in the visual voxels and also in auditory cortex. And also, our model is quite small, so we have around 329 million parameters in a single model, and then we have an ensemble of 60 of these, right? And so the total comes out at around 35 billion parameters. All right.
After this, I think we wanted to ask really what features predict what brain areas, right? And so we applied some explainable AI techniques, Shapley, and we noticed something very surprising, that the transcripts are the most predictive. They can predict even the sensory areas. This was very surprising for us. The second comes the JEPA. So it predicts the visual cortex really, really well, but also other areas. So it predicts all of the other regions as well. Beats, which is an audio model, it predicts also the whole brain, but the auditory cortex the most. Then we also had Whisper. Whisper predicts specifically the auditory cortex, but the improvement here is not so much. And similarly, other models also other features also contribute a little.
All right, so to conclude, we have this very lightweight model that has a high performance on both the in and out distribution data. And it, like I said, it has few parameters, and we use a relatively small number of ensemble models for this. And the compute is quite low as well. It takes around 20 gigabytes of VRAM and 45 minutes to train. So plausibly, you could run this locally on your computer if you wanted to. Yeah, and there's lots more interesting things to do here, especially with regards to neuroscience, and you'll have to stay tuned for those things. But in the meantime, we have the preprint out. So if you're interested in learning more, you can find more there.
Okay. So just to close, I just want to say how amazingly these people worked together. So if you ever find a CV of them on your desk, hire them immediately. And speaking of CVs, so we are hiring PhD students. So if you know someone, please get in touch. Okay. That's it.
Thank you so much. We have time for some questions. Any questions in the audience?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One, organizational, is whether all the members worked full-time on this, or it was just a side project for most of them. And another project is more like technical. So I saw that you include subject ID that you give to Transformer. If you could discuss this.
Maybe I can briefly say something about the working. So officially, this is a side project. Officially.
Yeah, I can talk about the subject embeddings. So it's just a vector of dimension 512 per subject. So you have 512 times 4. There were 4 subjects. And you use the same model, basically, for all the subjects, right? And this worked actually best. And what it gives us is very interesting, because since all the parameters of the model are literally the same for all subjects, if you have a new subject, you only need to train that 512 embedding. So, and you can do that with a very less data. We haven't tested it, but maybe you have like 5-10 minutes of data. You can just test, you can train those part, and you can tune the whole model for your own subject, and it will still work.
So for the actual testing, then, like when you submit the model, it has to first somehow take the incoming data, train this model?
We don't submit the model. So the way this competition worked is you get the data, and you just submit the predictions. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
So it's about the features. I can see that Quen explains most of the prediction. And if you remove actually many of them that does not predict much, you would achieve a similar accuracy, or those are necessary to include?
They helped. I mean, you see there are a few red spots here and there. So they are predicting something. And I think so this is on season 6 of validation. So, but they actually, I feel that they predict more on out of distribution. They have more of an influence on out of distribution. Sadly, we cannot make the same plot for out of distribution because we don't have the data.
All right, great, thank you. So I would say one more round of applause for Team STG. NCG, sorry. Too many letters. All right, so now we will arrive at our final speakers of the session. Stefano D'Ascoli from the Brain and AI team at Meta. Their team focuses on tackling major questions in neuroscience with the help of AI models and by using his tri-model brain encoder, or TRIBE. He reached a winning score of 0.2146 that secured him the first place in this year's Argonauts challenge. So please welcome Stefano D'Ascoli.
So hi everyone, so I'm going to present our team submission. So this is joint work with these collaborators at Meta AI, in particular in our Brain AI team. So generally speaking, we're focused on building foundational models of the brain. And our typical workflow is to align brain activity with AI model activations. So this can go in 2 ways. Yeah. The decoding direction where you predict the AI activity, and the encoding direction when you predict the opposite. And so we have 2 fundamental objectives, a more applied objective, in particular with the decoding direction of improving healthcare. And then in the other direction, encoding, well, there's a more fundamental objective of understanding better our brain. And so, of course, the Algonaut challenge fits into the second category in the encoding part of our work. So where the idea is to build a digital twin. I mean, this is this sort of North Star, a sort of a model of the brain which reacts in a similar way, which could potentially replicate, guide, and maybe even complement in vivo experimentation. And so the data set of the Algonauts challenge is perfect for this. First, because it comprises naturalistic stimuli, movies, which is sort of a necessary condition to have a generalizable model of the brain. And also because it's the largest data set of its kind, with over 80 hours per subject. So let's dive straight into the model. So as the name suggests, this is a trimodal model, so it takes as inputs the text, the audio, and the video. And each one of these modalities is fed into a foundational model. So here, actually, we only use 3 models, 1 for each modality. So for text, we use Llama 3.2. For audio, Wave2Vec2 BERT. And for video, we use Video Jeopard 2. So these models are frozen during training. And what we do is we extract intermediate representations from several different layers inside each one of these models, and then we compress them down to a fixed size embedding with an FFN. And one important step here is the modality dropout, which I'll mention a bit later, but essentially we randomly drop out each modality with a fixed probability to make the model more resilient. So once we have these embeddings for each modality, we concatenate them. And this produces a time series of embeddings, which we can feed through a transformer encoder, which has 16 layers. And so one important thing is that these time series are sampled at a different frequency than the native frequency of the fMRI machine. So instead of taking 1 embedding every TR, every 1.5 seconds, we take 1 every 0.5 seconds, so we have more temporal resolution. And so then we need to pull down to get back to the fMRI machine frequency. So we get these pulled outputs, and then we feed them through a subject layer like the other teams, which yields our predictions for the 1,000 parcels. So if we have a quick look at the leaderboard, you may have noticed that there's a difference in ranking between the in-distribution and the out-of-distribution phase, in spite of the fact that we used exactly the same model in both settings. And so this is somehow hinting that there's some good out-of-distribution generalization. So let me try and give 4 ingredients which may explain this difference. So the first is the fact that we do multi-time step prediction, actually like the previous team. So in the competition workflow, in the development kit, they suggest to take a fixed window of stimulus of 6 seconds to predict each TR. What we do instead is we take a very long window of 150 seconds, and then the target for the transformer encoder is to predict all TRs in the window at once. We only realized this quite late. This made a really big difference in our performance, both because it speeds up considerably training and inference, and also because it provides more context to the transformer encoder. Note also that the transformer encoder is bidirectional. Like mentioned in the first talk, this really helps, like actually making the transformer causal loses information. Second key ingredient is our temporal resolution. So as I mentioned, we have a higher sampling frequency than the one suggested by the organizers, so 3 times higher, which provides more information. Third ingredient, so the modality dropout, as I was saying, which consists in masking out input modalities with a fixed probability. I think this is one of the key ingredients. It really improved generalization in our experiments, and also it makes our model robust to missing modalities, which is the case, for example, in the Charlie Chaplin movie, which is included in the test set. One nice thing also with this is that it makes our model readily applicable to other data sets, for example, listening or reading data sets where you only have one modality. And finally, our ensembling strategy. So obviously, these are the tips and tricks which are really important at the end of training, at the end of the competition. So here what we do is we train 1,000 different models with different random seeds, but also we identified a broad set of hyperparameters which had a rather weak influence on test error, so that they don't degrade the performance too much. And we vary each one of these hyperparameters systematically within the whole grid. We also use stochastic weight averaging, which means that each model is itself an ensemble. This consists in basically averaging snapshots of the weights over the last epochs. And finally, the last ingredient, which is very important, is that we perform our ensembling by weighting the ensemble parcel-wise. Basically, what we do is we compute validation scores for each parcel, then we compute a softmax with a certain temperature, and this is done separately for each parcel, which guarantees that for each parcel we have the optimal mixture of models. Okay, so let me showcase our model in action. So in this plot here, we see 8 brain parcels color-coded, and on the right-hand side you see the fMRI bold responses over the first 3 minutes of a Friends episode. In solid lines, it's true, and in dashed lines, it's our prediction, so you can see pretty good correlation visually. So here I wanted to show a quick demo of our model in live. So on the right-hand side, you have the stimulus which is being viewed. And on the left, you get the predictions. And this is the OD movie World of Tomorrow, which is a cartoon, which is a bit weird. But what's interesting is that here you get weird noises, so you see auditory activation. And then here you have very strong colors, so you see the visual activation here. And then in the end of the clip, you get a dialogue. When you are old enough, and here you clearly see the language network activates. You will later upload all of your memories into this healthy new body. So yeah, I think this is a good example. So here it's Z-scored, so you only see the difference with respect to the mean activation of each parcel, but I think it's quite visual. So now I'm going to dive into more like neuroscientific analysis of our results. So first what we did is we wanted to perform a noise ceiling analysis. So first, let's look at the raw Pearson scores achieved by our model. So on the top right, you see the distribution across the brain. So you see, as for other teams, that we have the score tends to peak in language areas and in the visual area of the brain, with an average value of about around 0.3 in distribution. Now, thanks to the fact that one of the movies was viewed twice by each participant, we can compute noise ceiling, so the maximal achievable score given the inherent randomness in the recordings. And so if we normalize these scores by the noise ceiling, we get the following distribution across the brain, which is much more uniform and generally centered around 0.5, which is telling us that our model predicts roughly half of the explainable variance rather uniformly across the brain. So how does our multimodal model compare to unimodal encoders? So in this plot on the left, what I did is I trained our model with only one modality, and then I plot on the brain which of the unimodal encoders achieves the highest score. And so you get the sort of expected result that the video encoder encodes best the occipital parts, the audio encoder peaks around the auditory cortex, and text peaks in the language areas. So this is the scores they actually achieve. So you can see that unimodal encoders are much less good. And if you add two modalities, you always get a benefit. And finally, the multimodal model outperforms all other combinations. So really, the modalities are playing complementary roles. So how can this help us understand multimodal integration of information in our brain? So here are two plots to illustrate this. So on the left, what I'm showing is the difference between the multimodal encoder score and the best of the unimodal encoders. And what you can see is that the highest gain, which is marked by the dark red regions, seem to occur around the association areas of our brain, which is kind of expected because these are where modalities are integrated together. In contrast, in primary cortices, and in particular in the vision, the V1 part of the brain at the back, which is highlighted by a black circle, we actually get detrimental performance. So the multimodal is less good than the unimodal ones, and this was actually shown by the previous teams. To be honest, we couldn't be bothered to train a separate model for the vision part of the brain, but maybe we should have done this. So this makes sense. And what's more interesting is if you try to represent how these modalities are being integrated together. So in this plot here, we have an RGB encoding of the scores of the unimodal encoders, where red stands for text, green stands for audio, and blue stands for video. And so the mixing of these colors gives us information about where you get bimodal integration. For example, we see a yellow area in the temporal lobe, which corresponds to audio plus text being useful. And then you get cyan, so audio plus video integration in some parts of the occipital region. And finally, video plus text close to the parietal lobe. And finally, how can we use this model to replicate well-known results in neuroscience? So we give one example here. We do a contrast between the predicted responses on segments which contain speech versus segments which don't contain speech, and we can see that the significantly more predicted areas match quite well with the expected language network. So yeah, takeaways from this is that our first place mainly was due to the OOD performance of our model. We observed that our model predicts roughly half of explainable variants rather uniformly across the brain, and that multimodality is most beneficial in associative areas. So what are we going to do with this? Our plan in the next few months is first to make this model user-friendly. So one way to do this would be to build an interface where users can upload a video and you get a live visualization of the predicted brain responses. We'd like to train this model on more data sets, potentially generalize it to other recording devices. And finally, as I was saying, the overarching goal of this whole direction is to use this model for in silico replication and experimentation. So thanks a lot. And
thank you very much. So do we have questions in the audience?
Hi, thank you for a clear presentation. Actually, to all three winners or top three, congratulations. I think it's really fun and entertaining and interesting to look at these talks. I was wondering, I appreciated that you made a calculation of the explainable variance, and you say about half of it is captured. So what are your thoughts on what we need to do to capture the other half?
Use more ensembles? I mean, I think all of us have saturated a lot on this. We've tried a lot of things. I haven't had time to mention the negative results. I also tried stuff. Neuroscience-inspired stuff didn't really help. So honestly, my answer is I have no idea at this point. I've explored a lot of things, and yeah, it's an open question.
Also, thanks for the great talk. One thing I was wondering both about your model and the previous model was that you both noticed that the base model or the overall model is not as good at predicting visual cortex, but also both of you had an attention mechanism in between. So why do you think that transformer in the middle not learn to focus more on the visual features over all the others for the visual cortex?
Yeah, so my take on this is that I think there's some kind of a bottleneck because essentially our model outputs the final representation of our model from which we project the 1,000 parcels is a single vector. And so this single vector has to store information about all the parcels of the brain. And so I think there's kind of an information bottleneck at this point. You could try to increase, of course, the size of the embedding dimension, but then you get overfitting, you get other issues. So just like them, I observed that it works better if you predict separately different networks which have very different sort of distributions and characteristics.
So that vector is not specific to different parts of the brain, from my understanding?
Sorry?
So that vector, that embedding vector, is not specific to different parts?
No. There's only one vector.
Okay.
We actually tried an approach by where we use basically one separate vector for each parcel, like an encoder-decoder model. This was what was won the last edition of the competition, but it never worked for us. So, yeah.
Okay, one final question.
Thank you so much for the talk. I had a question about assembly. So you have 1,000 of models. Do you know the performance of a single model within this assembly?
Yeah, actually, until very late. We only did ensembling in the last week, so the gain was something, it was pretty small. It was from maybe 0.32 to 0.31 to 0.32, basically, the gain. So ensembling gain wasn't that huge, but it was significant enough to, it was so close in the end, especially in the first phase, that it was enough to make a difference. But yeah, single models are already pretty good. Yeah.
I actually had a comment to your question that you just asked. So what we discovered was the reason that visual cortex was not being predicted so well when you were trying to predict everything else was that single parcels, the other parcels that were not part of the visual cortex, they would start overfitting early while the visual cortex was still learning. So the overall would start overfitting, but the visual cortex would still keep on learning, and that's what we noticed, and that's what then we decided that we should use a separate model. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the last edition of the competition was only on the visual part of the brain, and so yeah, it's definitely the most it was the most information contained and hardest to. Yeah.
Okay, we can do one more final question.
Hello. I guess this is a question for all the teams, but I'm surprised not to see a plot where we get the amount of data that was being used and the performance of the model. Has any of the teams watched? Yeah, perfect. So there's more, in your interpretation, there's more to be gained with more data, maybe?
So it seems that we're kind of slowing down. This is also logarithmic on the X scale, so hard to really say. To be honest, these plots I always take with a grain of salt because there's so much details in the particular training procedure. For example, if you have to adapt the number of epochs when you take less data and you have to change the learning rate schedule, and this is why scaling laws is always a really difficult thing to establish. There was lots of errors in the original scaling law papers for LLMs. So this is actually a really touchy question, but yeah, here we actually, to do this plot, we used a huge number of epochs to be fair to the models with small number of sessions, and still we seem to observe a sort of log linear trend. So it's not, I guess it's not so promising in terms of, there's still stuff to be gained, but we can see that it's really slowing down. Yeah.
I think you're one of the only teams in the world to see some beneficial effect of having multiple subjects.
Yeah, actually, I think some other teams use also multi-subject training now.
Yeah, but usually people have a tendency to show that having multiple subjects in the same model usually does not bring the overall performance up that much.
Yeah, so it's not huge the difference as you can see, but it's definitely significant. It's kind of funny because our first model was degraded by multi-subject training, and then we found this improvement of multi-time step prediction, and now it's better with multi-subject. So I guess it depends, but yeah, in this case we managed to get improvements.
Okay, one final question.
Just a very brief comment. So also on what you said before, of course, there's a bunch of information that we'll never be probably able to predict just based on video inputs, right? So, like say olfactory information or so. So there's a hard limit somewhere. Yeah. And also we saw that, for instance, limbic areas are poorly predicted. I think the SDA team also showed that. So, yeah. Possibly something to do with the emotional processing, which would be very sort of non-movie related, or only peripherally movie related.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stefano, for your presentation. And one more round of applause for Stefano and all the other teams from today. I just want to remind everyone that the report and the codes are all available on the Algonauts website, not only from our 3 winners, but also from some of the other participants that submitted their code and reports. So if you would like to dig a little bit deeper, feel very welcome to do so. And also, for everyone that did not participate in this year's challenge, I also want to say again that we made the post-challenge benchmarks online. So we have the post-challenge benchmark for the in-distribution and the out-of-distribution challenge. So if you would like to give it a try, feel also welcome to do so. Both of which you can find on the Algonauts challenge website or directly on CoderBench. So, with the conclusion of this session, we are now moving forward to the panel discussion featuring Fabian Zins, Martin Schrimpf, Martin Hebert, Lün Belek, Radosław Cieche, and will be moderated by Ale.
Thank you.
Where's your mic? Good. What has the one of the online one?
Could we have the third microphone?
Okay, nice. Then we will now start the panel discussion. So the topic of the panel discussion is to discuss the future of challenges in neuroscience and the role that also large-scale neural data sets play in this. And because of this, the panelists are experts in both challenge or large-scale neural data set creators, or sometimes even both. And before getting into the discussion, before getting into discussion, I will present each of the speakers. So we have Martin Hebert for the University of Gießen. We have Lün Belek for the University of Montreal. Radek Cieche from Free University of Berlin. Martin Schrimpf from the EPFL. And Fabian Zins from University of Göttingen. And so the panel discussion is divided into 3 teams that we will discuss. So 3 discussion topics. And at the end, there should be 10 to 20 minutes for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, just keep it from the end segment. And so the first topic of the panel discussion will relate to, more specifically, just challenges in neuroscience and their future. And because of this, I would like the challenge organizers among the panelists to present or to give their 3-minute speech of their own initiative. And you can decide whom to start, either Radek, Martin, or Fabian. Do you have any preferences?
Okay.
You can also either...
The questions, or I just I have them here actually. So you mean like you have 3 questions that you wanted? Okay,
yeah, so anyway. I was sending you...
Yeah, sure, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so the organizer sent us 3 questions, like to talk about in our pitch. The first was, why did we start our challenge? What does it consist of? And what is unique about our challenge? What did we learn from it? And where is it now compared to what we envisioned it when we created it?
Yeah, so Fabian Zins started as the organizer and creator of the Sensorium competition.
Yes, okay, so yeah. We organized the Sensorium competition, so why did we start it? At the time that we started, I think there were only 2 other competitions. The one was like BrainScore and the one was the Algonaut challenge. But there was none that was focused on, let's say, data-driven models, especially also for the mouse visual cortex. And we thought that would be a fun project to do. And then we started the first challenge and provided also some data with it. And I think this was also one key motivation for me to provide some data to the community to train data-driven models for mouse visual cortex, because there is a lot of data out there, but it's often not that useful to train machine learning models. And so luckily I could convince Andreas to share some of his lab's data. And I'm actually very happy that it's used since then. What does it consist of? We had 2 challenges. The first challenge was to predict the responses in mouse visual cortex, primary visual cortex, to natural images. So that was kind of the easiest one. Then, and the second challenge was to predict the response in primary visual cortex of a mouse to videos. I think it was mainly Netflix videos, so maybe similar to what you have used. And we also had an out-of-distribution test set where we used like classical neuroscience stimuli. So what is unique about us? I guess that's mainly data-driven mouse. What did we learn from it? I guess we learned similar things that maybe you have learned too. So machine learning models rule at like predicting brain activity. Brain-inspired things don't often work. So I think this bitter lesson that we also got in machine learning, where handcrafted features didn't work that well, also applied to neuroscience so far at least. We learned that we can be easily outperformed by a lot of machine learning hacks like ensembling. So in the initial version, we didn't ensemble our baseline model. I think they would do this now. So things like this. And where are we now? We are planning another challenge, but this is also for the lack of basically human resources to program websites and get everything ready. It's still in the making, but we are basically planning another round of a challenge. Yeah. So maybe I'll hand over to you.
Just a really brief interruption. So it would be really good for the live stream if one person moved over there, and then the whole panel can see. Or you all stood up.
Hi. Hey. Okay, then thank you, Fabian. Maybe later you, if you like, you can also mention what might be some details and insight regarding this future challenge. But so Martin is the creator of Benchmark, which is both a brain score, which is both a benchmark and also a competition.
Yep. So BrainScore, maybe as a super quick pitch, hosts both brain and behavioral data. I think that's sort of one thing that we're doing a bit differently. Focus right now is on primates, both human and non-human, especially in vision and language. The reason for creating it was actually so I come more from a machine learning background. In my PhD, I asked my advisor, Jim DiCarlo at the time, that I want to build the most brain-like model of vision or visual stream at the time, and asked him, so what are the kind of core benchmarks that people are competing on? Again, thinking on ML. And it was kind of a non-starter because neuroscience at the time didn't have benchmarks. So it was just a necessity to first create something that was tractable and reproducible. And initially, BrainScore was really just a small library sitting on my computer, and eventually people found it useful, so it grew, and that's nice. So what makes it unique is, I think, several aspects. So I would say the main one is actually the permanent, continuous nature of it. So differently to other challenges, we ask modelers to actually submit the model, not just predictions, which enables us to then test the model on future benchmarks as well. So basically, when you have a winning model, like the winning model from last year, for instance, might not be the winning model anymore because new benchmarks have shown that it still fails in a particular suite of benchmarks. I think that's one thing that allows us to identify trends over years and across models that has led to some also really interesting science. The other aspect I would say is that because it's very much community driven, so it's not like we curate the benchmarks, although we try some of that too, but it's really inviting the community to submit their data, their models. So that means we now have over 100 different benchmarks spanning really a very diverse set of phenomena, anything from like early visual cortex, firing rate distributions to high-level human behavioral generalization. And then I think the behavioral aspect is also something that we find very important because we really care about the brain because it enables behavior, so we want to make sure we keep that connection to behavioral choices. What do we learn from it? I mean, there are a lot of science outcomes from this. So I'll maybe just mention one. So I think most of the people in this room know the initial result that models that are better at classifying objects in an image tend to be more aligned to brain data, so that's great. And that's, I think, one example of identifying relationships across benchmarks. You can do this in more fine-grained detail. So a few years ago, we did this with V1 alignment versus robustness to adversarial attacks. And that also showed a really strong correlation, which then prompted Tiago March and Joel DePello at the time to build a model that was more V1-like, and at the time was actually state-of-the-art in adversarial robustness for machine learning benchmarks. So I think these kinds of trends across models and benchmarks can be extremely interesting in adapting new trends. I'm probably getting to the end of 3 minutes, so I'll maybe just say briefly, where is it now? I mean, it's great to see that it has grown, but I think it's still, even with 100 benchmarks, it's still very far from what it needs to be, and maybe for our field more broadly, I still think we just don't have enough data. We don't have enough diverse data to really sufficiently test how good models are. So it would be great if maybe, we can get together more and actually curate really large-scale data sets that are targeted for models, maybe even with a setup like controversial stimuli where the data is collected with model separation in mind. I think that would really drive us forward. And I'm hoping we can make progress on that.
Thank you, Martin. And finally, Radek from the Algonauts Challenge.
Sure. Why did we start this? That was 2017 or 18 or so. Several reasons. One was, it was a no-brainer that we need to model at that time only the visual brain, and we thought the best way to do this is not researcher by researcher, but it's also not a problem that's well constrained enough to build an institute for it, like an Allen Institute for predicting visual brain response. You need something in between where people can collaborate at a mesoscale level, and we thought challenges are the right thing for it. That was one reason. Another one was we wanted to contribute to open science in a way that we, as a complementary way of fixing maybe what from an open science perspective is a broken system, by just introducing something which has it built already in there. So you don't put something on top of a running system, but you just provide an alternative way of doing science, where it's all built in. So you don't have all those problems that you're trying to fix. And the third one was, as Fabian said, running such a thing, especially developing such a thing, is a lot of effort. So I was very lucky to work with Gemma Roach, which was at Singapore at that time, and Odd Oliver, who really had this spirit and said, yes, we want to do this. So we had a team. And that was basically, that made it possible. What did we learn? I think we learned a lot. When we started this 2019, we did not plan this to continue until today. We actually had no plan beyond 2019. So we just wanted to do the first thing. So you first just learn to just put the thing together. What do you need? How much time does it take? You don't need to know all of this from the beginning. So we learned a lot as organizers, and I think people participating also learned a lot. Maybe some of the lessons are obvious to many of us. We heard the sense neuroscience insights didn't help much. Fine, but you have to bring this message along. I think many of us still have their grants applications rejected because they say, oh, we have all this theory, now you're just going to add 100 hours of data, what is it going to give us? I think it's going to give us a lot. Maybe we have to improve our argumentation of how we're going to go about arguing for this. But even if you just want to say, I want a huge data set which is going to transform how we do science, most grant funds are going to say, there's no theory, forget it, right? But we just have to create ways to tell people that, yes, this is what is going to make the difference in prediction and in theory. Where's this going to go in the future? What did it change? I hoped it would make the world a bit of a better place. It didn't make it as much better as I hoped it would be. But I think it helped a bit. And I think perseverance is key. So in the beginning I was thinking, let's do it and it's going to be done. And now I'm thinking, let's do it and let's keep on plowing for the next 20 years. And then it's going to get there because people people will start dying, the old guys, and new guys are going to come up. So you are going to come in, new ways are going to come in, and then the world is going to change a bit for the better. And if we just give up now and say, we get backlashes and grants and fun, no, we just have to keep on going. What has also been very rewarding for us, maybe that's what, it doesn't make us unique, but maybe special. I don't know. It has been very rewarding to work with people from teams like Neuromod or NSD, really getting deeply into the data, talking to those people, making a challenge out of this. This has been really exciting and fun. So this is maybe what is special for us as a team.
Thanks, Radek. So now we open the discussion to all panelists. So anyone feel free to respond. And the question relates to the future of challenges in neuroscience. And What do you think that are limitations and current challenges, and what would you do to address them? Or benchmarks? Whoever wants to respond.
I mean, I think the major limitation that is probably obvious to everyone is that the data just isn't there. Right? Like, I mean, Neuromod is great, NSD is great. I think it's still orders of magnitude below what we actually need to have really stringent tests on the models and maybe even data to train the models in the first place. Like we can train a little bit now, but still task optimized models, I would say, rule. Probably some combination of task optimized plus data driven will ultimately prevail in at least a medium data regime, but I think we're not even there. So I think it's easy for like this Neuro AI community to engage the modelers because, hey, testing on data and making that easy, that's of course an easy pitch. But engaging with the experimentalists to actually provide data that they could otherwise milk for years and get more publications out of, that's I think a much harder pitch. So if we can make that bridge better, and if we can incentivize the experimental side to really see the value in what these models add, I think that would help a lot on that. I don't think we're quite there yet.
I'm obviously absolutely on board with this, but I also want to emphasize like a detail which I think is very crucial, and that maybe like not everyone realizes, is that the data that is recorded normally in neuroscientific labs is different kind of data that we need for modeling. Because a typical neuroscience experiment is optimized for control, right? You want to isolate an effect. You want to establish a causality. So that means you run the same trial many times so you can average things out. And that means like in visual cortex, mice and monkeys see a lot of gratings, or or the classical stimuli, MT sees a lot of flying dots. But we won't create a model that mimics the brain under natural conditions with this data. So that means we need data that is as diverse as possible, like show natural videos, images, crazy videos that we have seen before, and then we can use this. But like for a neuroscientist, that's not immediately data they can analyze, because what would you average over? Like you need a model to do that, and that really creates this need to collaborate together. We need the data, but also we need to provide the models so it can be useful in neuroscience labs.
So just to make this a bit more engaging in the discussion, I'm going to try to actually be a bit more controversial. I fully agree. I think that like on this... Wait for it. First I have to be nice before I can push back. Okay. So I agree. I think that we need more data, right? Like I think we haven't covered the landscape of the kind of data sets that we have yet. At the same time, I think there's two things that in the past people have not necessarily been focusing on very much, and I wish that people were going to focus on this a bit more in the future. One is what is it actually that is supposed to be shown to like animals or humans, and this is not just about like, oh, we're going to show them just lots of different kinds of things. I think you really need to think very carefully about the kinds of biases that come in when you're selecting the wrong kinds of data. So, I mean, you probably remember the famous like data-driven approach that was done on like YouTube videos, and it just like learned a representation of cats because there was just so many cats on there. So, I mean, these are just like, and if you look at ImageNet, the way it was designed, like you have hundreds of dogs in there. So if you take Coco, there's just hundreds of surfers or giraffes, right? So I think you just want to be a bit like also careful to think about like, okay, what is it actually that you want to be collecting? The other one, which I find even more important, is that the evaluation metric that we're using at the moment seems to be just performance, accuracy, and prediction. And one thing is that like we always think, oh, there's just like a small improvement in accuracy, and that's not actually that important, which can actually mean a leap in so in other words, like explaining variance in itself is easy. Explaining like variance close to the ceiling is getting really difficult, right? And there is actually the part where it's getting like really interesting, right? And I'm not necessarily sure if we're actually just by focusing on accuracy we're going to get to actually reaching the ceiling, and whether we should actually start to look at other kinds of metrics of performance, like, hey, what is it actually that these models are learning? Is there a way in which we maybe can quantify, I don't know, what are the important like features or the important dimensions that these models are learning? Are these like, do these make sense? Or are these just hacks? And they're not going to get us to like answering the final question of like being able to actually model
the entire system.
I think what would help to ground this dataset discussion a bit is to separate data for training and data for testing. So I'm totally with you that data for testing should be super diverse. Like actually last year we had a benchmarking competition that invited experimentalists to submit data that would break the models. And I think that was a really nice way to find new data sets that were kind of out of focus for at least us at the time, and that are really hard challenges for the models now. But I think those might be different from kind of just the large-scale training data that we could collect. So I would say on the training data set side, like let's get as much as we can. On the testing side, I'm totally with you there. I think we need to be very careful in really quantifying the diversity and making sure that we're testing the right things.
All right, I'm going to take just an orthogonal direction to what was discussed there. I think what's missing right now is sort of like perception to action. A lot, at least for Algonauts, we've had a lot of benchmark about perception, and the brain does things, and we control the body. And having the kind of experiment what was implemented here with out of distribution and retesting to new tasks, but that would integrate action. And obviously, from an experimental point of view, this is very challenging. And it's a shame that this session is in parallel to the one on video games, because I think that would be part of how we could make that happen.
Okay, so we have different types of cognitive or motor action tasks, let's say. And the other focus would be to have more data, better data, and possibly different metrics. And explainability of models, which relates to the second 2 points of the panel discussion, which actually tackle data and second one, explainability of models. So data, correct models of the brain should not only be accurate, but also robust and well generalized to different distributions. And for this, we all know that the more data and the more diverse this data is on which the models are trained, typically the better these models are in doing this. And to reflect this is also why during the Algonauts challenges, we typically try to increase the amount of data on which the challenges are based. And also one of the reasons why this year we decided to select the winners only based on their out-of-distribution generalization performance. So this is to say that large-scale neural data sets are rather important for challenges, not only for challenges, but here, since we're focusing on challenges, for challenges and benchmarks. And here on stage we have two panelists. So Martin Hebert, who is the creator of the Things Initiative and also now of the Lion dataset. And we have Loon Belek from Neuromod, so our collaborator for this year's edition of the challenge. So before opening the discussion to the entire panel, would you like to give a few words about your data sets?
Sure. All right. So Neuromod main motivation was really to gather data to build brain encoding models from the start, with two main characteristics being multimodal. So covering sort of not just vision, but incorporating things like language, memory, and actions. And the other one was to be able to test the generalizability of model within the same subject. So not have to retrain a new encoding model because it's a new task, but actually being able to take a model fully that predicts brain images and now test it on a new, completely different set of stimuli. So what is in the data set would be a bit too long for a few minutes, but I guess you've seen the video component of it. That in itself is about 80 hours of fMRI. It's the most naturalistic component. We just released a controlled data set using the Things stimuli. Thanks, Martin. So there's 4,000 images in there from about 700 categories. So if you wanted to test your models of video encoding and see how they perform on cucumbers, you should go ahead. There's lots of those, amongst many other things. There's a poster tomorrow. C161, Julie Boyle, our project lead, and Basile Pinsard, data manager here. So if you want to see a bit more what's in the data set, they have a nice table. But I would say that our next big wave of release is going to be around video games. We invested heavily in video games. We have about 50 hours of fMRI collected with various video games, which we're going to release progressively in the next years, as well as more measures. So it's not just fMRI, we have a bunch of physiological signal eye tracking data that will be made available to complement the video data, making it an actually active state where there is an output and not just an input.
Thanks, Lun. So, Martin?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you've already pitched it. I don't have to say much, I guess. So when Ala was asking me, like, why did we actually end up doing this, collecting this Things initiative, starting with the Things initiative, it went back to like sometimes 2017, 2018, and at that time, I mean, this was before like this like huge boom in AI and everyone actually just like running all these models. But one thing that you could observe is that everyone for all of their experiments was just collecting their own small data set, and then we're trying to draw pretty general conclusions based on the data sets that they collected. But in the sense, like the results that they produced, you would never know would they actually end up generalizing to other kinds of stimuli that you could show. And for us, that was a little frustrating at the time, because like, how are we supposed to make progress if we don't know if these results would generalize? And people get caught up in these small like debates. So our idea was to say, why can't we actually go and try to sample all of it? We specifically wanted to focus on objects. The reason was it was easier to do this in a systematic way. So we said, okay, let's just see what kinds of objects exist. I'm going to spare you the gory details of how we ended up finding the categories, but we ended up with roughly like 2,000 different objects that people distinguish on an everyday basis, and then we collected like manually about like 26,000 images of all of these different objects. And this is like the Things data set, and then we also said, okay, let's collect some large-scale data on these different data sets. So we collected like behavioral similarity judgments. We have about like 5 million similarity judgments now for all of these different objects. Soon to come also not only like for images, but also for words. Of these images, we have, and we collected like some fMRI data and MEG data in a small set of subjects. And while this data collection was going on, I was talking to the people about this, and they got actually really excited. And they said, "Hey, this sounds like a really useful like initiative. Why don't we actually also collect some data and make that publicly available?" So today there's monkey intracranial recordings from multiple different regions. There's like EEG data that Ale actually collected. There's more fMRI data, which is actually with multiple images being repeated rather than each one just shown once. There's like people all over the world like collecting different data with this data set. And what is really exciting to me about this is that not only like do you now have like these data sets available that you can like, I don't know, run your models on, or that you can just use for learning something, or you can see how like previous results generalize, but also you can actually use them to connect these different data, these different like modalities, and that you're collecting your data together. So you can see like things as acting like some sort of like Rosetta Stone that allows you to connect these different branches of like behavior, brain recordings, and artificial intelligence. So for me, that's really exciting. And in the future, so there is more like data being collected. As I said, we have words, but there's other kinds of data sets that are being collected. You can just check it out on our website if you're interested. Who's this useful for? That was one of the questions. It's mostly, since these are images and of different things, I would say it's mostly relevant for people interested in like visual processing, but also like semantic processing, because these are have different meanings associated with them, and probably like memory as well. So do you have time for the second data set?
1 minute.
1 minute, great. So we were thinking about like a way in which we can actually automate what is the ideal data set? We wanted to figure out what's the ideal way we can actually like sample the visual world. And the idea was to make this a closed loop thing. So we want to build a model of the visual system, show like a bunch of stimuli to the visual system, then train the model on it, and then have the model actually make predictions about what stimuli we need to show to learn more, and then close the loop and just keep going like that. And turned out that it actually doesn't work. So we don't know at the moment why, but it seems to be like it doesn't work. So that was a bummer. But what we did instead, and that actually worked quite well, is to say, why don't we sample from a very, very broad set of different stimuli. So we took Lion 2B, which is like 2 billion image text pairs, and from that we curated a set of 120 million natural images, from which we then like sampled in a representative way, like a smaller set of 30,000 images, which we then showed to people in 70 MRI. So it's over a course of like 30 sessions. Should be pretty high quality, I would say. We're hoping that's going to be on par with NSD, but the idea would be that it's actually sampled in a much, much broader way, so that you now actually cover not only like 80 different categories, but it's actually covering the entirety of the visual experience, hopefully. So you're buying some certain biases by the sampling that you have, but at least you can now leave out parts of those representations, and you can actually do OOD testing if you want on the data set itself, which I think is actually quite nice. There's a proceedings talk from Johannes Roth today showing you about like how we selected this Lion natural data set, and we're expecting to release the data set in spring next year.
Okay, then speaking of what is the ideal data set, with the goal in mind of achieving models that are most accurate and most robust within the framework of challenges, for example, what will be the best way to collect data sets optimal for this? Would increasing the amount of data collected, just collecting more and more, be the way? Or should we instead focus on, since we already have a lot of data sets, finding ways to bridging these data sets, for example, with foundation models trained on many different data sets, which then learn to predict brain responses to different stimulations, brain data modalities and subjects? Or, as Martin suggested, should we instead not maximize the amount of data we collect, but rather think about how we can collect fewer data, but in a smarter way? And let's try to keep this maybe 1 minute maximum per person, so that we have time for the last discussion point as well.
All right. So from a logistical perspective, what made Neuromod possible is that we got very large funding to collect data and make it available. And I think having this kind of centralized facility would be wonderful for the field and help get an ideal data set by having full-time staff who know what they are doing, collect the data. And as a next best thing, I think we see an ecosystem of dataset producer working together, and where you can also move from one resource to another because there's overlapping stimuli. So having things replicated across multiple species and modalities is really wonderful and true asset for the modelers.
Yeah, I think this is like one challenge that I've been like struggling with myself is like, we wanted to have representative sampling ideally of our like visual experience, and that I think is an extremely hard to achieve aim, and it's also like from a data sampling perspective actually very suboptimal, because you would be oversampling a lot of parts that you don't necessarily need to sample. So ideally you would actually want to do some sort of like importance sampling, where you can just like sample the stuff that you already know very easily, very, very sparsely, and then you just actually want to sample the tail of the distribution more and then be able to correct for that. But it's actually really, really hard to do this, and one of the reasons also why it's so hard is that we don't even know what this distribution looks like. So you could be like, oh, maybe I just look at like videos of people just like carrying a camera on their head, and then we just like run some statistics on that over time, and then eventually we'll be able to figure out like, okay, that's the natural experience. But I don't think that's actually what matters in our heads. What matters in our heads is like how we make sense of this, right? I mean, I see lots of like grass every day because I walk past grass, but I don't care about grass, right? I care about other kinds of things. So the distribution, like getting actually a good measure of this, is I think is the first step of what we would need in order to actually figure out how we should be then like sampling and this distribution. And how to solve this is not trivial.
Okay, 3 points. One is, I think we have initiatives like the Argonauts project which focus on one big data set, and then maybe BrainScore, which for now mostly focuses on many small data sets, but now we start to get into a situation where we will have many big data sets. And it's an open question whether we can nicely integrate them, and it might make sense to talk beforehand, because it's a lot easier to think things up rather than post hoc try to bring things together. It might just be, we're beating ourselves up of, oh, we don't have enough data. Well, we're actually working with the biggest data set available right now, so we can't do any better. We can tap ourselves on the shoulder a bit. But of course, everyone knows we need more data, but who can really record thousands of hours? We are in a good position that we can actually start going there, in the sense that we have people to talk to how to do this, right? You don't have to start from zero. You talk to Lune, you talk to Martin, right? You talk to the NSD people, so that helps. So that's an open question. Many big data sets, or do we still focus on one? And I would say we have to integrate many big from the start. The second, I think it's a very important point, also mirroring Lune, that we move away from only vision to a multimodal perspective, because it brings in different people. Doing vision science only is great, and it's what I do, and I love it, but we have to, or would want to, engage a wider community. And I think auditory language people coming together, and in the brain these things do interact. And a lot of lessons we've learned is that not looking at things in an isolated fashion, but making them more naturalistic, helps a lot in modeling. So we have to go there. Now I would say probably the easiest and no-brainer, the next really thing you have to do is play video games for hundreds of hours, and where you will have memory, learning, emotions, and vision, lots of vision. So I'm going to be happy too. But it's easier said than who's up for recording thousands of hours of these games tomorrow? Okay, you are, great. There we go. so one can think of how to do this and then move this forward.
Yeah, fully in support of all of that. I'll just make one point, which is the ideal data set does not exist. And I think that's because every data set has biases. It depends on what exactly you're after. The tools we have at our disposal will improve and get better. So like in 5 years from now, we might actually want a much different data set than what we could collect today. So I think it's extremely important that we keep integrating all of these together, and ideally have a collection of diverse data sets which all have their unique bias, so that overall at least we maybe get a more holistic picture. I think that is the way to go.
Yeah, I agree with all what was said before. I may just add 2 more things. I think there are 2 kinds of data sets, and you said this before. The one is for testing, and I think this is an ongoing endeavor. So I think actually neuroscience labs and so on should try to break our models as hard as possible and come up with really mean data sets, and then we include them and basically test the models on that. And for training, I also agree. I don't think there is the ideal data set. I think, also looking at machine learning right now, I think more is better. We should just try to avoid really stupid mistakes. I mean, like training only on dogs or only on cucumbers. I don't know. So as long as it's diverse, large, and doesn't have too many biases, I think size is good. But then I think that brings the final problem with that is we really need resources to do that. I mean, somebody needs to record those data sets, and somebody needs to curate them, somebody needs to program websites, toolboxes, whatever, so that people can actually use them. And obviously we need to talk to each other to make sure that we don't mess up the API, so it's kind of cross-compatible. But I think this is also a major limitation factor. At the moment, for our competition, it's basically PhD students that do this on their free time next to their projects.
Okay, so now last discussion point. Let's keep 1 minute responses as well, so that we have 5 minutes in the end for questions from the audience. And challenges so far have focused mostly on predicting brain responses, as opposed to giving some explanatory insight. So what I would like to ask you is, why it's a twofold question, but you can give a single answer. So why is prediction relevant if it does not imply explanation? And connected to this, do you think that we should include explanation in next challenges? If no, why? And then if yes, how can we do that? 1 minute each.
Holy cow. Okay, 2 30-second one. The first one is that if you combine naturalistic and controlled, you can probe systematically the performance of the model in certain situations, and you get a better interpretation of failure modes of that model. So we didn't have that in this competition. We had a few OODs, but each OOD was really complex. Second, I think we could have a competition on the models themselves. Try to interpret the latent features. Now that we have really complex models, the one that was trained by Meta, the presentation only scratched the surface of understanding what that model does, how it does it. And I think that would be a really cool competition, digital brain competition. On all of Lion, because you can show them many images.
Yeah. So I think it depends on the goal. So if you want to build a model of the brain, like an in silico model, then you ideally want the model to also be explainable. So then you want your data to be collected in a way that it allows you then to get maximally explainable. So you want in your benchmarks, you want to have some sort of explainability in there, I think. If you want to build a model as a tool that allows you then to generate new predictions, which is also good for development and theory, I think you may not want to care so much about the explanation part of the model itself, but then at least you want it to generate predictions that are not only just tied to accuracies, but you want the predictions also to be kind of making sense, if that helps, or if that makes sense. So I think it just depends on the goal.
For the future of the field, we should definitely focus on prediction and not theory for now, because theory will fall out of the predictions. You've seen this here, where people said, this is what I tried, these 25 things didn't work, these 5 things did.
Yes. Yeah, okay. So I think we're seeing increasingly explanation doesn't help to build better models, at least not explanation at the level of classic neuroscience mechanisms. Explanation at the level of machine learning principles, architecture, data, and optimization, that helps, because that helps us inform a gradient for building better models. But in the end, yeah, I think prediction is the way to go. Theory will follow. At least I don't care about explanation right now.
Yeah, I thought I had an extreme view, but I know. So, yeah, I also think that, personally, I would rather go for a better predictive model right now, because who would want to analyze a model that's not that predictive? I think even if you take an extreme view, it's like, oh, you just upload your data into a model with which like a small number of like 35 billion parameters, or what did you have? Then still there's an interpolator. You can basically screen through interesting experiments and then maybe do some theory. I also don't know what explainability means. Explainability is not very explainable to me, as I just don't get it. And I think what we need, or what would satisfy my explainability, is that we have causal hooks in the model, so that we can causally manipulate behavior, brain activity, so that if I push this, then that happens, and we can test this experimentally. That I would find very satisfying. But I think this can be built in the model, and it can also be built in a model without necessarily being biologically mechanistic, realistic, and so on. It's one way, but we don't need that, I think.
That would also be another point for cool data sets that we're not even talking about at all, which are causal experiments. We don't have any of those, and those would be super interesting, I think, to model.
Okay, thanks for that. We have time for 1/2 questions from the audience.
So this question was prepared very well by these last answers, I think. So we noticed in the presentation that sort of all teams said sort of like, oh, the neuroscience-inspired stuff didn't work. And so one could take that and then say, oh, let's brush it all away. Maybe it's all wrong. but there's like, we're approaching like a century of research, and sort of people have invested lives and into finding out what, say, a specific brain area does and so forth. So I think it would be maybe a tad arrogant to brush that away. So the tension then is between that and the fact that these big models, so or we could call them mappings between input and output, performs well or comparatively well, but if you were sort of magically have, say, a 25 Tesla MRI scanner and you have a fantastic data set, and then you scale up your model to have like 100 trillion parameters and it predicts now not 20% out of a distribution, but 50%. Where will the theoretical insight fall out? So you just say it will follow, but could it not just be that you are sort of scaling up this mapping and sort of you've bypassed the actual structure that the brain uses, and so how will theoretical insight ever fall out?
So let's have one response. Either one of you three with strong statements.
Oh, strong statement. I'm not sure that I can try. Okay, I'll try. Well, we can maybe talk later. So, so first of all, I think it's very important. I don't want to shit on like 70 years of neuroscience research or more. And it has been like a heroic effort, but it's also very limited for a long time. And like there were like biases in how you sample cells and all that kind of stuff. We know a lot of details, but it's also that is changing. We can record more and more data. And just personally, every time we fitted a model to brain data, and then we were trying to reproduce experiments, it's not every time, but like a decent percentage, we find stuff that doesn't agree with textbook knowledge. And then you're talking to a neuroscientist, and there's like, oh yeah, I also have this weird cell that doesn't like fit to textbook knowledge, but it's not published. So I think this is actually, it's very important that we have these models to screen and search for that stuff. And then, yeah, you're right. We have like a multi-billion parameter model, and now where will the insight follow? And then, okay, here maybe the bit more controversial things. I think, to me, like science or like insight is basically model compression. You want to have the least amount of parameters that describes your data the best as possible. But if you have something to compress, you can already start from that. And some stuff might not be that compressible because our brain is made for the natural world, and the natural world described it in a few equations. This is basically very physics driven, is that you need like a 5-parameter differential equation and you have explained everything. But vision is maybe not like this, and we have to find other ways that we call a theory, but I think a model is a very good start for that.
So we take one last question from Rata. The microphone will come.
Well, thanks for organizing this. I think this is amazing. I have a question, I guess, for both Radek and Martin, which is, when will be so can you tell us what we cannot predict so far? What has been the insight of running these competitions? And also there are all these statistical tools that people have been developing to find specific classes of stimuli or certain behavioral patterns that models cannot predict or do not predict at this point in time. So would it be worth running a challenge based on like a retrospective perspective on, here's the stuff that we cannot do today, and push on that? Like even from this challenge from this year, I'm sure there is, certain parts of the brain, certain sets of stimuli, or the interaction between the two that we cannot do. And that might also lead to the theory. Here's what's different.
It's not like there's a hard cutoff, or like everything is predicted to some extent. And I think you saw that in all of the competition talks that like the whole brain has some color mostly. And I think we've seen that over the years now as well, where like for instance on BrainScore as well, all of the benchmarks, like none of them, or like 90% of them are not met at 100%. There's not a single model that predicts all of the data. And the same is true here for Argonauts. So it's not like there's a specific set of stimuli or a specific set of brain regions that is not predicted at all. It's more just a graded response of where some things are missing. And I think like for none of the data, we really have good models right now. So I don't think we're there for anything. And vice versa, everything is still up for grabs. Like we just need better models that we don't have now.
But are there benchmarks that most discriminate between models today?
Yeah, I mean, like at least for us, that was the whole point of the 2024 benchmark competition. Like we specifically gave people money so that they would submit benchmarks and data that would break the models maximally, and the ones that got the most money were the ones that broke it the most. And like maybe just to say, but like, those were various forms of out-of-distribution testing, like kind of more classic psychophysics tests in vision that I think just don't really confer to in distribution what the models are trained on.
So, Radek, is that what we should be doing next year?
What we will be doing or not doing will depend on what data sets are there. But I think what is not explained is most of the variance. We have benchmarks running all the time. So obviously we're missing, maybe not the most, but we're missing a huge amount of insights and mechanisms in the brain. So now all the theory-driven people, this is not against them, but it's basically if you have this idea, just implement it and explain that variance. And you will make an invaluable contribution to the field immediately in theoretical and predictive terms. So we can want for more data, but even the data we have right now is very well poised to ask questions about what role does memory or action playing, all of these other, let's say, cognitive functions that we have not really modeled explicitly can do there. So I think this is the next step. Work on that. Try to get to the, as Martin said, once we are at 90% and we're 91%, then we have to start caring about many other things. But right now we're at 30%, okay? So let's make the other 50. And if you look at computer science, like a detection challenge or a categorization challenge, you had a phase where things moved very, very slowly, then deep nets came and bombed, they moved fast, and whoop, we had this huge increase. But we're far away from this in terms of explaining brain data. And once we get there, then then we can take the next step. But the next steps are basically going on with this, trying to implement your theory in a workable model and showing, yes, it works. We have a group which said we don't need many parameters. We have a small model comparably, right? And they push it and they say, that's how far we can get. And that's great. And then, okay, you don't need that many billions. You don't need that many millions. So this is the insights that we get. And this is, I think, what we need to just keep on plowing on and doing.
Okay, one for real last question. Please keep it short.
Yeah. So a short answer to your question, motor areas are not really predicted well in this one because they are not being used. Maybe a different data set would help that. Also, limbic areas are not also predicted so well, but maybe I think it's individual, right? That
but the ceiling for those are low too. So it's not surprising that they're not predicted.
Yeah, for this data set.
So that's not really an answer then.
Why? Okay, I think
there's
maybe
no
I can.
variance to predict.
Yeah, in this data set, maybe, okay, that's not what you meant maybe then. My question would not be about like science, but it would be about science communication. So we received a newsletter and it said that Meta AI has built a model that can read your brain. And also there were a lot of people on Twitter that said about that Meta can sort of like read your brain. There is no individuality. They have a model that can predict your whole brain. And then there was people talking about free will, that you don't have free will because how do we like let these people know that it's not what's happening right now? This is not the goal. This is not what we are doing. There were also people that said that, oh, now Meta will read your brain while you are scrolling reels and then it will use it somehow and stuff. So I think there's like a huge gap between the communication, and I'm not targeting Meta by any chance. Meta just has to happen to have like a lot of followers that are not scientists, and that's what happens, right? So like, how do we do that? Or is it not a problem?
I suggest passing this on to Meta, because I will not comment in any way of how people misrepresent results that Meta has.
I don't work for Meta, but do you want to actually take it? Okay.
Yeah, so let's...
I wanted to actually help him, but never mind. Hi guys, thanks for the organization of the workshop. Thanks a lot for the comments.
Yeah, this is communication is very hard. The tweet that was released, I think, was factually accurate, and once it's taken from there, it's very difficult to control how people react, or people or bots. To be honest, I mean, it blows so quickly on Twitter that I'm not sure whether this is real people behind it. I think the best is to try to be open source, open about the research, explain in every possible occasions what we're trying to do, and yeah, I don't think there is any other things to be done than just stick to the scientific principles.
Thanks for the answer. And I would like to thank the panelists for being here. And with this, we conclude the session, and thank you to all of you for joining.